Larry and Sergey were desperate now. If David Sheridan and Andy Bechtolsheim didn't see the potential of Google, it was probably time for the Google boys to get back to those PhDs.
Larry showed up first, and then Sergey showed up, and Andy roared up in his Porsche.
When I arrived at David's house, Larry and Sergey were already there, so they jumped right into giving me a demonstration.
We met this guy. He quickly, he took a quick look at our search engine. We chatted with him a little bit.
They ran him through a demo of here's Google, and we can type in this, and I'm feeling lucky, and all those sorts of elements.
And it was immediately clear that this was a very, very good idea.
I think Andy was sold very quickly on this.
In fact, I think this was the best idea I've seen in my entire life.
So he said, I don't want you guys to have to, take too low a valuation or to have to worry too much about these money things right now. Why don't I just write you a check?
So I rushed out to my car, pulled out my checkbook, and wrote them a check on the spot.
Came back with his checkbook, and he wrote us a check for $100,000.
To Google for $100,000, the bank account, and Andy saying, well, put it in there when you do.
I don't think I've ever written a check on the spot like this before. That was the only time in my life.
They were so convinced that search was so big, so important, was going to grow so much, that I asked, so how big? And Larry Page, completely serious, said, well, 10 billion in revenue. Then I did fall out of my chair. I was certain that these were very ambitious entrepreneurs with a powerful vision.
Something like $500,000 was flying out of Google's door each month, which meant that $25 million in the bank wouldn't last for long. The obvious solution was to follow the likes of Yahoo and Excite and put banner ads on their site. But in one of their gutsiest and most far-sighted decisions, Page and Brin refused to follow the easy path. They simply couldn't stomach the idea of Google turning into just another cluttered portal.
They wanted to make sure that they left people with a great experience, but also with advertisements that made sense to people.
Page and Brin weren't against advertising per se. They just wanted it in a more user-friendly, webified form. But they couldn't think of what that would be. Time and money were running out, however, so in the most controversial move of their young company's life, they found the solution to their problem in true Silicon Valley style. They copied it from somebody else. That someone else was this man, Bill Gross. Based down in Los Angeles, Gross had no connection to Google. He ran a company called Idea Lab, a self-styled incubator of innovative notions and the startups that hatched them. It was Gross who cracked the riddle of internet advertising, and, in a roundabout way, provided Google.
When I saw this particular problem at this company, where companies were looking for ways to advertise more, and I was sort of saying to myself, how can we make this better? What's wrong with the way we're buying the advertising right now? What would we like it to be?
In hindsight, Gross's insight, like Page's count the links, was brilliantly simple. It started with the realization that when someone types in a search query, they're not just telling the world what they're interested in, they're often telling the world what they're interested in buying. In tech jargon, the terms you type into a search engine are called keywords, and Gross realized that they could be worth a fortune.
Keywords are the future of the business. Keywords were so valuable because when a person types in a keyword to a search engine, they are giving you a huge window into the mind of their intent at that moment. You get them to type a few words, that's insanely valuable. It turned out to be the big idea that search could be like Yellow Pages.
Gross ultimately persuaded the skeptics at his company, and in 1998, he launched a site based on keywords and sponsored links that would eventually be known as Overture. It was an instant success.
The CEO of the company came up to me and said, we are handling billions of microtransactions. We are bigger than the phone company even in the number of transactions we're handling. And that was really incredible. And then I realized, this really is a big thing.
What Gross didn't know was that back in Silicon Valley, his moves were being watched, and that Google would come to see his idea as the solution to its business model quandary.
Larry and Sergey happened on a little site that was growing quite nicely with sponsored listings called Overture. And Larry in particular, I think, felt that this offered a roadmap for what for a business that Google might be able to get into.
The Google boys arranged to meet Bill Gross, and then to meet him again and again. Much of business history is determined by such meetings between aspiring titans meeting behind closed doors.
Well, I met Larry and Sergey, and we were talking to them about finding some way to blend the really great monetization that GoTo was having and the incredibly relevant search results that Google had. And we talked a number of times about different ways to incorporate those together.
Sometimes meetings like this end with both sides emerging arm in arm, but other times not. And that was the case with Google and Overture. What exactly transpired remains a bit of a mystery, but the outlines are clear enough. First, Larry and Sergey walked away from the talks without cutting any kind of deal. And then, shortly thereafter, Google released a service called AdWords that was uncannily similar to Overture's. Sound suspicious? You bet it does.
Gross sued Google over that similarity and the appropriation it suggested, but ultimately the two sides settled out of court. And one thing's sure, the settlement included enough money in Google stock to keep Bill Gross extremely happy. On August 19th, 2004, Google went public, listing its shares for sale on the NASDAQ stock market. In the previous 5 years, the company had gone from zero to a staggering $3 billion annually in revenue, and had become a household name. The Google IPO caused a frenzy of speculation and anticipation, especially among those who hoped, prayed, it might revive a tech sector still recovering from the dot-com crash.
In 2005, Google had a gross turnover of $6.1 billion US and a net profit of $1.5 billion.
How are you going to convince me to trust you?
We're clear in our privacy policy that we aren't retaining your search information because we want to, say, profile more about you. We're retaining the search information we retain, we do for quality purposes.
Google aren't being careful enough, I don't think, to anonymize information they store about you. They've said publicly that they do keep records of the search terms that come from your computer, linked to the internet address of your computer, and potentially that can be linked back to you, especially if you sign up for Google services like Gmail. So I don't think that they can honestly say that the potential isn't there for them to misuse some of this information. We've seen in recent months that it's not just Google's decision either. Even if Google was the entirely pure company that they claim, you have other interested parties. For example, the US government demanded last year that Google hand over information on what people were searching for. So even if Google aren't abusing personal information, that doesn't stop other people coming in and trying to get access to that information.
How can you take fears away? This is a big brother company.
I guess I just don't agree, and I don't think of it that way.
What's very fascinating is so far we've had one approach to information, which is, dear consumer, pay attention, I'm going to give you some information. And if you don't log into your TV at 8 p.m. tonight, you're going to miss that information forever. Or, dear consumer, pay attention, tomorrow morning's newspaper is going to talk about how fantastic it is to travel to Spain. Well, consumers are not like that. We don't like to be programmed. You and I want it when we want it.
The opportunity of our time is to have all the published works of humankind accessible to everybody. We have the technology of storage, we have the networking to be able to give distribution, and we have the political will to live in an open society. The idea of having universal access to all knowledge is within our grasp. We could build the Library of Alexandria and not just have all the great works in one place, but to make it accessible to anybody all over the world.